Jim Mora has pieced together what little we know of the sad and curious story of ex-gunner Donald Desmond Smith.
It was just a bad dream, really, wasn't it? And so long ago, it hardly counts.
1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7, open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Woo, we're all gonna die. Now come on, Wall Street.
Unfortunately, the memories of Vietnam never died for some people. A plot in the tiny cemetery at Glenorchy marks the grave of Donald Desmond Smith. He was a Vietnam veteran, a young man who volunteered to fight communism. He was no hero and no coward. He was simply a good soldier who did his job and came home. Came home a disillusioned human being, came home to a hard and lonely life.
How would you like to live down below there and among the thorn bushes, sleeping unromantically under the stars or in the pouring rain, often in sub-zero conditions, no ground roll, no sleeping bag, no tent, just a polystyrene strip for shelter? What would make a man want to live like that? Well, we don't know, but tonight we can provide you with a few clues.
Donald Smith was a gunner in 1969 and 1970. He was in 161 Battery. It wasn't the most dangerous job in the army. Gunners had to do evening clearing patrols to secure their positions, but their main job was to kill from a distance. Once, 161 killed the wrong people, Australian soldiers. It wasn't the Kiwis' fault, but it must have left a mark on gunner D.D. Smith. So did other things.
He was quite distressed, not knowing who the enemy was. People who would be helping you one day would be dead in the field the next, having been shot as the enemy.
But that was an experience common to all soldiers in Vietnam. There were other aspects of the war hinted at in his one conversation with his brothers, but let's just say that Dinky Smith never recovered from his tour of duty. Previously, he had been a social sort of young man who liked the odd beer.
Was he likeable? I mean, you were fairly close. Did you like him as a young lad?
Oh, yes, I liked him, yes. And the people that he mixed with liked him, too.
Mm.
He was in team sports. He wasn't a guy for individual activities, like individual sports.
Mm.
He was part of a cricket team and part of a rugby team.
Ivan was the closest member of the family to Donald, but the two men who knew Dinky best are two veteran gold miners, Mark and John Shaw, who live on the remote southwestern coast. They brought him up and taught him many things, including his later legendary skills outdoors.
Well, you wouldn't get a happier lad than Dink.
Did you have a feeling before he left that it might change him in some way?
No, none at all. No, but I didn't want him to go. But he was a lad that he'd never seen anything like he'd seen there.
Yeah.
Just changed his mind completely. He said it was just unbelievable, you know, but he didn't talk about it.
Because I guess you would have asked him, wouldn't you?
Oh, I asked him, yeah. But I didn't press him because I could see that he didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
The solitude of Gillespie's beach wasn't enough to heal Dinky Smith. After a month, he left, and his friends never saw him again. Other men and women may have seen worse and suffered less, but stress is a relative thing. In any event, after returning from Vietnam, Donald Smith literally stayed silent for 15 years. He was never known to say much more than 2 words to anyone. He ended up at Twizel, where his last job was at the Ohow Dams. He was a very good worker, but never socialised. He'd work through lunch or tea breaks or sit by himself. Once he shut himself away in a clothing locker. Or he'd improve his incredible physical fitness. He wasn't unfriendly. He'd just say hello and goodbye, and that was it. This dry riverbed just outside Twizel was his real home, and in the end his undoing. His other address was Single Men's Hut number 176.
When Donald Smith slept inside the single men's hut, he used to put the mattress up on a bunk and bed down on the bare boards of the floor, and every night he'd sleep in a different position. And when his brothers finally asked him why he did this, he said, because if you sleep in the same place every night, it makes it easier for the Viet Cong to get you.
That made him a curiosity, an eccentric, but it was his incredible survival skills in the wild and his phenomenal toughness that made him a kind of legend in South Canterbury. Donald Smith was known to have walked overland from Twizel to Queenstown and back, hundreds of kilometres. He'd take with him his boots, a pair of cut-off Ministry of Works trousers, a jacket he had made from rabbit skins, a fishing rod and a compass, and that was about all. Except for a companion, a ferret, who'd catch food for the both of them to eat, and in return get some of the fish. He never took a gun. He'd been good with a gun before Vietnam. It's cold. It's 6,500 feet up. It's Temple Peak in the Remarkables. Donald Smith spent 3 weeks here digging for scheelite, which he carried down the mountainside in sacks to sell. Bed in the bush with stars to see, that's the life for a man like me, said Rudyard Kipling. Let's hope the mountains and the bush, the moon and the stars were Donald Smith's friends, because he didn't have any others.
I just couldn't believe the change in him, you know.
So, I mean, Vietnam ruined his life, really, in some ways.
Oh, yeah. Buggered him.
Mainly because he hardly ever bought anything. When he died, he was worth almost $100,000. And there were still thousands of dollars worth of uncashed checks because he didn't like banks. And there was cash, lots of cash. His death was as mysterious as his life. One Friday night in 1985, Donald Smith walked out of Twizel down to the Pukaki River. The Pukaki isn't exactly a river anymore, it's just a spillway. But occasionally the floodgates are opened. Donald Smith may have been trying to get to one of the holes in the riverbed where some of his possessions were buried. They found his body on an island in the middle of the Pukaki. That was several years ago. The case was closed, the file shut, the story over. Until more recently, when two local men had their four-wheel drive fall into a hole in the riverbed, a hole dug by Donald Smith.
So you found $7,000, including about $3,500 in cash. I mean, you're an honest man. A lot of people would have waltzed off with that.
Yeah, well, I don't know. A lot of people wouldn't call me honest. They'd probably call me insane. In fact, there was comments to that effect, like when they found out about it.
Yeah.
There's still the gold that Donald Smith owned. That'll be found perhaps in another camouflaged hiding place, but we hope not. The gold was a parting present from the Shaw brothers. It deserves to be left in peace, just as its owner, we hope, found a kind of peace in the strange solitude of his odd existence. Ivan Smith conducted the funeral service in Glenorchy, and his farewell words for his brother were these. "Listen," says St. Paul, "I will unfold a mystery. We shall not die, but we shall be changed. And in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, the dead will be raised immortal, and we shall be changed."
Jim Mora, the reporter.